Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Jared Brown, and on today's video, we're going to run through my top picks from the primer for week 2, 8 players that are going to outplay their ranking on FantasyPros.com and be fantastic for your lineups. So every single week, I'm going through the deep weeds of research for the primer to give you players to start, to sit, to flex, and to possibly fade. If you want all this fantastic information and to be able to make informed decisions for your lineups, check out the primer now at FantasyPros.com. Let's get into these players. Okay, first person up here on the list, and I gotta mention, it was tough finding a fantasy tight end to talk about here because a lot of guys disappointed, and really looking at the position, it's tough to find a guy that's gonna stand out, but I got one for you. It's Tucker Kraft. He is tight end 25 currently right now on FantasyPros.com, had a 57% route share, the clear starter for the Green Bay Packers last week. And I know what you're saying to yourself, but Malik Willis is going to be the starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. That's tough, right? We should shy away from this passing attack. Yes, I'm going to tell you, I am muting a lot of the projections for this passing attack, but what are we talking about for fantasy tight ends? You get a touchdown, you're probably a top 10, top 12 fantasy tight end for the week. Tucker Kraft can do that. And if you want to make things easy for Malik Willis in this start, give him short area options. Just ask him to dump the ball off and let guys cook after the catch. And Tucker Kraft can do that. And then we get to the matchup. It's fantastic. Indy allowed the 10th highest yards per reception and the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Get Tucker Kraft into your lineups if you're struggling at the tight end position. He's going to outplay his current ECR on FantasyPros.com. Okay, next player up here. Going over to the running back position. Got to talk about Wan'Dale Robinson Jr. And I know you've heard his name. You've heard me talk about him all offseason. I'm back again to tell you to play him and that he's going to outplay his ranking on FantasyPros.com. I understand he's the RB22, so we're getting kind of close to the cutoff of players that I usually talk about in this weekly video. But I think people don't understand he was the RB14 in fantasy points last week. And looking at the role that he played, almost 60% of the snaps, 15 touches, 89 total yards, and a wonderful matchup against the Giants this week. Week 1, this run defense was abysmal, and this is just carrying over from last year. They give the 4th highest missed tackle rate and the 6th highest yards after contact per attempt. So if Daniel Jones implodes, we're going to see Wan'Dale Robinson Jr. get fed on early downs, probably get into the end zone at least once, maybe twice in week 2. Get him into your lineups. Okay, staying in the same game, and I know this is going to be a nasty pick, so go ahead, pinch your nose, look away if you must, but listen to my voice. Wan'Dale Robinson is going to outplay his ECR ranking on FantasyPros.com. He already did it last week, people. So I'm just doubling down that he does it again this week because the volume he saw was magnificent. He is currently the wide receiver 55 on FantasyPros.com, and he crushed that ranking last week as a wide receiver 4 or 5. In most ranking sets, he was the wide receiver 31. And in PPR leagues, you need to be looking at him as a flex play. He gobbled up almost a 27% target share, 11 targets last week, 33% of the air yards, and almost a 37% first read share. So Daniel Jones was looking for him constantly, and he's going to do it again this week, going against Mike Sanistril in the slot for the Commanders, probably running around 85% of his routes against him. And Sanistril was just a rookie corner. He did what most rookie corners do out the gate, and that's struggle. Not saying he's not a good player, but he's going to have to sit here and find his feet in the NFL, find his legs. And what do we see in week 1? He allowed an 86% catch rate, a 139 pass rating in his coverage. Get Wan'Dale Robinson into your lineups, especially in PPR leagues. He's going to pay off. Okay, next player I got to talk about here. We're going to move over to the quarterback position. And I'm cheating a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and mention that right now. QB 13 in rankings right now on Fantasy Pros, but he was already QB1 last week based off his production. He was a QB 12 in fantasy points. This is Matthew Stafford, and he is going to be amazing. I don't think people really understand that this Rams offense last week, and I know we have offensive line concerns, but the defensive matchup and Matthew Stafford are awesome, and the volume is going to be amazing. I don't think people really understand. The Rams last week were top 7 in both neutral pace and passing rate. This is an offense that was second amongst the entire NFL. in neutral passing rate, and they're going to run that back again this week. So Matthew Stafford was a QB 12 in fantasy points last week. He could run that up even higher this week in a wonderful matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, which their secondary is one of the worst in the NFL. Last week, they gave up the third highest yards per attempt and the third highest passer rating. So if the Rams could somehow keep him clean in the pocket, he has enough weapons still. I know Puka Nacua is hurt, but Demarcus Robinson, foreshadowing, it's foreshadowing people, we're going to talk about him in a little bit, is going to also produce. Matthew Stafford can walk out of this week as a top 10, top 8 fantasy quarterback. You have to consider starting him depending on what your quarterback options are for your fantasy teams. All right, before we break into the top 4 pack of players that I have for you this week from the primer, we have to talk about it. If you are juggling multiple fantasy football teams and feeling a little bit overwhelmed, you drafted too many teams in draft season, that's not really possible. We are here to help at FantasyPros. We're going to help you simplify things with the Multi-League Assistant. You can see the latest news, notes, rankings for every single player across all of your fantasy teams with the Multi-League Assistant. It's all in one spot, making your path to victory clearer and easier. Dive in and let us help you dominate all of your fantasy football leagues with the Multi-League Assistant today at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or on the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Download it today. Okay, getting to the top 4 players on this list. Next guy I got to talk about here, and I know he's a little bit older of a running back, but right now he's healthy and he's crushing it, and that is Aaron Jones. RB23 right now on FantasyPros. He was the RB9, people. Put respect on Aaron Jones' name. Last week, he was a top 10 running back. Played 55% of the snaps. Had 16 touches and 109 total yards. And I know everybody's looking at this 49ers matchup and they're saying, I gotta stay away from it. It's terrible. It's horrible. No! This run defense is not nearly as scary as you think it is. Week 1, they give it the 14th highest explosive run rate and the 5th highest missed tackle rate in the NFL. This lines up with metrics last year for this run defense. Didn't really change over any personnel. I'm telling you right now, Aaron Jones is going to pay off again in week 2, even if Minnesota gets down early, which could happen. I'm not going to say it's not. Then we're going to see passing downs. We're going to see check downs for Aaron Jones in the passing game. And we know that still scores fantasy points for our lineups. Get him into your lineups now. Okay, staying on the running back position, and this is a little bit of a nastier pick. I'm going to go with it, though, because the matchup is right, and he's going to get a ton of volume, because he did last week. And that is Najee Harris. RB24 on FantasyPros right now. He can produce as a mid to high-end RB2, maybe touch RB1 production in week 2. And I know you're saying I'm crazy. I understand that. He was the RB35 last week in fantasy, but he didn't get into the end zone. He can do that this week. He played 56% of the snaps, had 21 touches and almost 80 total yards. Those numbers are going up this week. And Najee, I think people still don't give him enough credit. He was extremely efficient with his touches last year, and we saw that again in week 1. Amongst 34 qualifying running backs, Najee Harris was 16th in explosive run rate and 12th in missed tackles forced per attempt. Now, you look at the matchup, it's great for Najee on the ground. And we know one thing about Arthur Smith. While we might hate most of the things Arthur Smith does, he likes to run the ball, and they're going to do that a ton this week. Denver cannot stop anybody over the last 2 seasons on the ground. So the Steelers are going to feed Najee Harris. Denver last week, 2nd highest explosive run rate allowed, 12th highest yards after contact per attempt. Najee is going to eat in week 2. Okay, moving over to wide receivers, and I got to talk about a guy who absolutely just dominated last week. That's Jameson Williams, the wide receiver 32 on FantasyPros. He was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy scoring last week, had a 32% target share, 43% first read share. And I know you're saying, okay, well, you're going to look at the ADOT. It was 15.4 last week and say, oh, he's only a field stretching threat. No. That is not the case. 6 of his 8 targets came within 19 yards of the line of scrimmage. 50% of his targets came within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. He was used all over the field and not just in the deep portions of the field. You look at this matchup, I'm not scared about the Buccaneers secondary. Get Jameson Williams into your lineups. And now for the piece de la resistance. The number one player that you need to plug into your lineups this week that I think is going to crush and outplay his ranking, that is Demarcus Robinson. I already talked about Matthew Stafford earlier in this video. Well, somebody's got to catch passes. It's going to be Demarcus Robinson, and people are sleeping on the talent. Wide receiver 48 on FantasyPros right now. He took over the Puka Nacua-esque role last week in this offense, and he's been really good over the last 2 years. You look at week 1, 78 qualifying wide receivers, and this data courtesy of our friends over at Fantasy Points. 33rd in reception and separation rate, 12th in route win rate. You look even to last year, Demarcus Robinson was top 20 in separation rate and 42nd in route win rate. This offense, and Matthew Stafford is a kingmaker, Demarcus Robinson could be awesome in week 2. You need to consider him and get him into your lineups. Do not worry about the Arizona Cardinals secondary. They got the 3rd highest PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers last year, and they did not get any better in the offseason. You have to consider him as a wonderful flex play for week 2. All right, everyone, those are my top 8 primer picks for week 2. Players that are going to crush their ranking on FantasyPros right now. You need to get them into your lineups. Flex plays, must plays, get them all in there and use the multi-league assistant. Let us at FantasyPros help you dominate all of your leagues. I'll be back next week with more primer picks. Head to fantasypros.com, check out the primer right now, and win all of your matchups for week 2.